Have you ever been in a situation where you felt this really subtle pressure to just conform to a rhythm that didn't fit you, but you couldn't quite, put a finger on why it felt so wrong?
Oh, I mean, absolutely. It's like this low-level hum of discomfort that you just can't shake.
Exactly. Well, welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're going to give you the exact vocabulary to explain that weird, unsettled feeling.
Which is so needed, honestly.
It really is.
Yeah.
So our mission today is to explore a fairly challenging piece of writing that connects two worlds that probably seem, well, entirely unrelated to you. We're
Mm.
talking about adult social spaces on one hand and early childhood education on the other.
Yeah, it's a wild connection, but it makes so much sense once you see it.
Right. We are unpacking the hidden architecture of how our society handles the word no. Specifically, how a person's no, or honestly even just their natural misalignment with the crowd, is so frequently reframed as a deficit.
Right, like it's a problem to be fixed.
Exactly. We're looking at how pressure is just constantly dressed up as care.
And it's a dynamic most of us encounter daily. But we rarely have the words to actually describe it. We're really looking at the concept of consent today, but not just as, a simple binary checkbox of yes or no.
Like signing a form or something.
Yeah, exactly. We're looking at it as a continuous field of attunement. The sources we're digging into today ask you to consider how often our culture treats a boundary, not as like valid information, but just as an obstacle to be managed.
Right, an inconvenience. So our guide for this whole exploration is a Substack article from May 21st, 2026. It's titled The Architecture of the No, Consent Across Contexts.
Such a good title.
It is. It was written by Dr. Jane Horrocks and published on her platform, which is called Sensual Residue. And we also have a brief piece of supplemental commentary on the text that gives us some really interesting historical context later on.
Yeah, that context is super important.
Definitely. Now, Dr. Horrocks uses her own lived experience to dissect these dynamics, and she writes from the perspective of an artistic Gestalt processor.
And we should probably pause there just to define that term because it becomes incredibly important later in the discussion.
Good idea, yeah. Go for it.
So when we say someone is a Gestalt processor, specifically regarding language, it means they process language in complete chunks or, wholes rather than word by word.
Okay, so instead of learning the word dog and then the word runs and then putting them together, they might just learn a whole phrase like, the dog runs fast, all at once, like
Yeah.
as a single unit of meaning.
Precisely. Yeah, they hold on to these large, intact phrases first and only break them down into individual words much, much later.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And that specific neurodivergent perspective is really the lens through which she examines how the world reacts when you just don't fit its expected rhythm.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah,
Well, let's get right into the scene she paints to open the article because, I mean, it is so vivid.
it really is. Yeah.
So we're in a queer playroom. And imagine you're sitting on this long couch against the wall, just kind of sunk into it. It's a spot with really good sight lines.
The best seat in the house, basically.
Right, exactly. And you're just watching the room's unspoken choreography unfold.
Yeah.
She notes there's this queer atmosphere everywhere, but not as like a loud statement, just as the default baseline. People are moving in ways that make sense to each other.
Yeah, no one is watching for the wrong move. The author actually describes it as a space of collective non-interference.
Collective non-interference. I love that phrase.
Me too. It's a beautifully subtle concept. It's basically an environment where people don't pull you into their orbit before you found your own footing. You are just allowed to exist until you are ready to engage.
But then the door shifts, and the whole rhythm of the room just breaks. A man and a woman enter. They come in together, but, as the author observes, not quite together.
Right, there's this disconnect.
Yeah. So the man enters first. He is very upright, very certain. He's, as she puts it, doing confidence, and it lands loudly against a room that really doesn't need that kind of performance.
No, the room is already settled.
Exactly.
Hmm.
And the woman, on the other hand, is scanning. She's hesitant. Her body doesn't really arrive in the same way. She is just visibly unsettled.
And from the couch, the author's pattern recognition just kicks in immediately. The misalignment between this couple becomes super visible in these tiny, half-beat delays.
Those little micro expressions, right?
Exactly. The man's movements are declarative. He wants to be seen. He wants to dictate the energy. But the woman's responses arrive just a fraction of a second after they're expected. And Dr. Horrocks uses this striking phrase here. She says the woman's responses feel translated rather than felt.
Translated rather than felt. I mean, think about the last time you were at a networking event or maybe a party and someone just cornered you with a conversation you desperately didn't want to be in.
Oh, we've all been there. It's the worst.
Right. Your body probably did exactly what this woman's did. You smile, you nod, but you are just running this internal translation program to maintain the shape of the interaction. You aren't actually present at all. You aren't choosing it.
Yeah, you're just surviving the moment. And as the man's confidence sharpens in this scene, he starts making these expansive, grand gestures to invite others into their circle.
Right, trying to hold court.
Exactly. And on the surface, if you just glanced over, it looks like an open, generous invitation to the room. But in response to that expansion, the woman actually recedes. She sort of slips into a quiet absence.
Yeah, she doesn't make a scene or run away. She just emotionally checks out.
Right.
Okay, let's unpack this for a second. Because it's like watching a dance where one person is doing a wildly confident solo routine and they are essentially just dragging their partner around as a prop.
That is a perfect way to put it.
From the back of the room, it looks like an invitation to connect.
Yeah.
But up close, the timing is completely fractured. And that fractured timing is what triggers the author to actually intervene.
Yeah, she describes this protector mode kicking in. It's an old, familiar pattern she recognizes, you know? The look of a physical body being present while the person inside just steps completely back from it. So the author and her friends move. They don't rush. They don't announce themselves loudly. They just step into the rhythm of the room and physically place themselves between the couple.
And the man gets annoyed. I mean, of course he does. He fully expects his frame, his performance, to be respected by everyone.
Right. How dare they interrupt his show?
Exactly. He starts to say, well, like, this interference is just a massive inconvenience. And the author doesn't yell. She doesn't make a grand spectacle. She just says, no.
Just no.
Yeah, not loudly, just clearly.
And that single word completely collapses his performance. His audience is shifted. The script is broken. He tests her boundary with like a flicker of bravado, but she holds her ground.
She's physically taller, right?
Yeah, she's taller, and he quickly realizes the energy has totally drained out of the moment. So he retreats. I mean, he tries to make it look like he's just casually choosing to walk away, but it is a retreat.
Oh, totally. But the aftermath of this intervention is what really caught my attention.
Yeah.
The friends don't make a spectacle of the woman who was being pressured.
No, they handle it so beautifully.
They really do. They take her to the restroom. They give her water. They hand her a mirror that, as the author puts it, didn't demand anything back.
I love that detail.
Me too. They just give her space to breathe and they ask if she wants to stay. Eventually, they arrange a taxi. But crucially, they name what happened. They explicitly tell her that her leaving was not a failure. They tell her that she was reading the situation correctly.
And validating that internal experience is just vital. They are telling her that her yes matters, which fundamentally means her no is real.
Right.
And in a room between adults, this kind of interpersonal coercion is relatively easy to spot once you know what to look for, right? Because there are physical bodies to read.
Yeah, you can see the tension in a shoulder or that half-second delay in a smile or the physical withdrawal.
Exactly. Which brings us to the real pivot of the article, because if we can see this dynamic in a club because of physical bodies, how does this exact same architecture operate when it's entirely hidden inside an institutional system?
Yeah, this is where it gets crazy.
The author realizes this connection during a completely mundane moment just scrolling through the internet.
Okay, yes. So Dr. Horrocks is scrolling online, and a specific post catches her eye. And it immediately triggers the exact same physical sensation, that same disorientation and recognition of harm that she felt watching that couple in the playroom.
Right.
The post is from a parent and asks a very simple question. It says, how do I get my autistic child to love reading?
Yeah.
Okay, I have to stop here. Here's where it gets really interesting. Because on the surface, those two things feel wildly different.
They really do.
I mean, to the average person listening right now, a parent asking how to help their kid love reading sounds incredibly sweet and caring. It is jarring to compare that to an entitled guy pressuring a woman in a social space. How are these the same shape?
Well, that instinct you have right now to separate the two scenarios, because one looks like love and the other looks like coercion, that is exactly what makes the systemic version so durable and so hard to dismantle. The author maps out the core architecture underneath both of these scenarios. In both cases, someone in a position of power sets a frame.
A frame, meaning they define the rules of the game.
Yes, they define what a good connection looks like or what educational progress looks like. And they set this frame entirely without the input of the other person.
Okay, I see.
The man in the club decided what a fun night out looked like. The educational system, or the parent relying on it, decides what loving reading looks like.
So when the woman or the child doesn't meet that predetermined frame, when their natural rhythm doesn't sync up, their misalignment isn't read as valid information.
Exactly, it is translated.
Translated.
Yeah, she breaks down the specific language used in systems to translate a child's no. When a child hesitates, it isn't read as a boundary. It is reframed as weak skills or a lack of motivation. Or the adults say, they're just not comfortable yet.
Wow. Just like the woman's hesitant responses in the club were her trying to translate her discomfort into something the man would accept.
Precisely. And the systemic solution to all of these translated problems is always more exposure and more reading time. The child's no is softened into a not yet.
A not yet that just assumes an eventual yes.
Right. Desire isn't something that's allowed to emerge naturally anymore. It becomes something to be manufactured through repetition.
That makes the classroom dynamic feel so much heavier.
Yeah.
Because, like, a creepy guy in a club is an individual actor. He's pushing an agenda, and you can just step between him and his target.
Right. You can physically block him.
But in the classroom, the system does the pushing. It does it quietly, persistently, through benchmarks and standardized tests. Reading just becomes this proxy for competence and for belonging. And the child is ultimately threatened with this underlying fear of falling behind.
Yeah, the pressure is dressed up in the language of care, but it is still fundamentally pressure.
So that forces us to ask a mechanical question, I think. Why is the autistic child resisting this traditional reading frame in the first place? What is actually happening there?
This is where Dr. Horick's expertise as a Gestalt processor really illuminates the failure of our educational tools.
Let's dig into that, because earlier we defined a Gestalt processor as someone who encounters language in wholes, right, in chunks.
Exactly.
So how does that clash with how a school teaches reading?
Well, neurotypical educational systems are built on analytic processing. They teach language piece by piece. You learn letters, you sound out phonics to make words, you string words together to make sentences. It's a very bottom-up construction.
Okay, so a teacher holds up a card with the letter B, the child says "buh," and they get a gold star.
Right. But many autistic children do not build language that way at all. They encounter language as wholes, intact phrases, maybe songs or movie quotes.
Oh, like repeating lines from a show.
Yes, and they hold on to these holes because the rhythm and the intonation work for them. These phrases carry deep internal meaning, and they actually help regulate the child emotionally.
Right.
The child doesn't need to break the phrase apart into individual phonetic pieces for it to be real, useful communication.
Okay, let me try an analogy here to see if I have this right. So what does this all mean? It's basically like the educational system is demanding that the child builds a Lego house, brick by brick, following a very specific instruction manual.
Okay, like this.
But the child has already brought a fully formed, beautiful, precast room to the table.
Yes.
And instead of admiring the room, the system says, no, that's not how we build, and just throws the room away because it doesn't match the rubric.
That analogy captures the tragedy of it perfectly. Let's look at a concrete example from the text. A Gestalt processing child might say the phrase, "to infinity and beyond," every single time they feel brave or want to try something new.
Oh, from Toy Story.
Right. To the child, that whole phrase literally means courage. But to a standardized reading test that is only measuring phonetic decoding, that child is just repeating nonsense from a cartoon, so the test fails them.
Wow. So it's not that the child isn't developing a complex relationship with language. It's that the system's tools are entirely incapable of seeing that development.
Exactly. The author calls this the problem of legibility. The system only recognizes narrow, sequential outputs. If you aren't moving from decoding to comprehension in the exact order the manual dictates, your language is treated as an obstacle to be corrected.
And the second you treat someone's natural way of existing as an obstacle to be corrected, you're right back in the playroom.
You really are.
You're the confident guy demanding the woman match your rhythm. You are overriding their internal reality.
Yeah, when a school system throws away a child's natural language because it doesn't fit the rubric, that is an assertion of power. It's the system saying, I own the terms of this interaction.
Right.
And historically, that exact same assumption of ownership applied to both groups we are talking about today, women and children.
Yeah. This brings in that final piece of source commentary we reviewed. And we're just reporting what the source material highlights here to provide context We're not endorsing a specific political stance, but it notes a really heavy historical through line. The two groups being discussed here, women in social spaces and children in educational spaces, are both groups that historically have been treated under the law as the property of men or parents.
Yeah, the commentary draws that out very clearly. There is this deeply ingrained assumption that property owners are entitled to the compliance of their spouses or their children.
Yeah.
The person in power feels they have a fundamental right to dictate the destination of the person under their care.
It's the assumption that the child or the woman doesn't actually have a coherent internal world of their own. So the adult or the man just has to provide it for them.
Exactly.
So if the root of the problem is this historical entitlement to compliance, what is the antidote? How do we build spaces that don't do this?
Well, what's fascinating here is how Dr. Horrocks frames the solution. She calls it epistemic respect.
Okay, epistemic respect. Break that jargon down for me.
Yeah.
What does that actually look like in practice?
Sure. So epistemology is basically the study of knowledge, right? How we know what we know. So epistemic respect is the willingness to accept that another person's internal experience of the world is completely coherent and valid, even if it does not align with your frameworks. It means trusting that they know their own reality.
Meaning, I have to respect that your reality is just as real as mine, even if it looks like nonsense to my grading rubric.
Exactly. It requires the person in power, the teacher, the confident man in the room, to completely relinquish the assumption that they already know the correct destination for the other person.
Yeah.
You have to give up the idea that you are the director of their play.
Wow. And the author details this really beautiful inversion that happens when you actually grant a child or a partner epistemic respect. When you trust their reality, their no stabilizes.
It does.
It stops being a frustrating obstacle for you to overcome, and it becomes an orientation.
Yeah, it becomes a signal, like a compass. Their no points away from harm and toward what they actually need. It points in the direction they are naturally heading, which, might be a destination the educational system hasn't even named yet.
So if we go all the way back to the central question that triggered this whole exploration, the parent asking, how do I get my autistic child to love reading? We can finally see the flaw in the premise.
Right.
The real problem isn't that the child doesn't love reading. The problem is that what the child already loves to do with language is not being recognized as reading.
And that misrecognition is the start of a very damaging cascade. Misrecognition, held over a long period of time, becomes pressure. Pressure, held long enough, eventually becomes compliance.
Yeah, the child just gives up their precast Lego room and starts stacking bricks the way they are told to.
Exactly. And the system happily mistakes that defeated compliance for success, all while the actual joy in learning is completely lost.
Love does not grow under insistence. A no is not a prelude. Those lines from the conclusion of the article are just going to stick with me.
They are powerful.
Whether you are navigating a crowded social space or trying to support a child's education, a no is crucial, valid information. If the system cannot read it, the problem lies with the system, not the person speaking the no.
It requires all of us to actively look for what the author calls the quiet agreements in our own lives.
I love that. Quiet agreements.
Yeah, we have to look for the attunement and the reciprocity that makes spaces truly safe. We have to strive to build environments where expansion happens because it is shared, not because it is driven by one person's rigid agenda.
We've covered a massive amount of ground today, from the unspoken physical choreography of a club to the hidden systemic pressures of a classroom testing environment. I want to leave you with a thought to mull over on your own.
Always a good idea.
Think about the spaces in your life where you hold authority. Maybe you're a manager at work. Maybe you're a parent with your kids. Maybe you're just the planner in your friend group. What if the next time you encounter a stubborn, frustrating no from someone, instead of instantly asking yourself, how do I overcome this and get them to a yes, you paused and asked, what is this no trying to protect?
That is the question that changes the architecture of the room.
It really is. Until next time, keep looking for those quiet agreements.